3 days before Christmas, I was sitting in my small, drafty apartment, wrapped in a blanket, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a group text from my mother, Catherine. I picked it up, expecting a reminder about what dish to bring to the annual family gala. Instead, the message was cold, direct, and final. "We've decided it's better if you don't come this year. Derek feels uncomfortable with your presence. Please respect our wishes." Seconds later, a notification popped up. My sister Victoria had hearted the message. I stared at the screen, waiting for the hurt to hit me, waiting for the tears to sting my eyes. But they didn't come. I didn't cry. I didn't call to beg for an explanation. I just felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me like the first frost of winter. I typed one reply, "Understood. You won't see me again." Then I looked up at Ryan, who was sitting across from me in the worn armchair, watching me with that quiet intensity that had first drawn me to him 2 years ago. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something about him that made you want to tell him your secrets. Maybe it was the way he listened. Maybe it was the way he looked at you like he could see past all the layers you'd built up over the years. He nodded once, just once. Then he said 2 words that changed everything. "It begins." Let me tell you something about my family before I explain what happened next. The Harringtons are what people in our town call old money, which really just means they've been wealthy long enough to forget what it feels like to struggle. My great-grandfather made his fortune in textiles during the industrial boom. My grandfather tripled it through real estate. My father, Gerald, spent most of his life pretending to manage the family investments, while actually just attending charity galas and playing golf with other men who'd inherited their positions in life. I was born the disappointment, not because I failed at anything, but because I succeeded in ways they didn't approve of. I got a scholarship to study psychology instead of following Victoria into the family-approved path of marrying well. I worked as a counselor for domestic abuse survivors instead of lunching at the country club. I dated men my mother called beneath us instead of the trust fund boys she kept pushing in my direction. Then I met Derek Whitmore. Derek was everything my parents wanted for Victoria. Tall, handsome, from an old family with even older money. He was being groomed to take over his father's investment firm, the kind of place where they moved numbers around on screens and somehow made millions without producing anything tangible. My parents practically salivated when Victoria brought him home for the first time, but Derek had a problem. He couldn't stand Victoria, found her boring, predictable, too eager to please. What he wanted was a challenge. What he wanted was me. It started innocently enough. Comments about my smile, brushing against me in the hallway, standing too close at family dinners. I ignored it at first, told myself I was imagining things. Then, at last year's Christmas gala, when everyone else was in the ballroom admiring the 12-foot tree, he cornered me in the library. "You're wasting yourself," he said, his breath hot against my ear. "Working with those broken women. You should be with someone who can give you the life you deserve." I told him to back off. I told him I wasn't interested. I told him to stay away from me. He didn't like that. The thing about men like Derek is that they're not used to hearing no. They've spent their entire lives getting everything they want, and when someone refuses them, something breaks inside their carefully constructed self-image. They become obsessed with the thing they can't have. For the next 6 months, Derek made my life hell. Not in obvious ways, of course. He was too smart for that. He did it in whispers and shadows. He told my parents I was jealous of Victoria. He told Victoria I'd been flirting with him. He poisoned every family conversation until they started looking at me like I was the problem. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was a Sunday in March. Victoria was out of town for some charity event, and I'd been invited to dinner at my parents' house. Looking back, I should have known something was wrong when Derek's car was in the driveway. He'd been drinking. I could smell it on him the moment he walked into the study where I was waiting for everyone to gather for dinner. The house staff had been dismissed for the evening. My parents were upstairs dressing. We were alone. He didn't corner me this time. He grabbed me. When I fought back, when I managed to break free and ran into the kitchen, he caught up with me. His hand connected with my face hard enough to send me crashing into the counter. I felt my cheekbone crack, saw stars exploding across my vision. I managed to get to my feet, managed to get to the back door. As I stumbled out into the cold March air, I heard my mother's voice from the top of the stairs. "What's going on down there?" I ran to the kitchen entrance, blood streaming from the gash on my face, holding my cracked ribs, and looked up at her. My mother. The woman who'd given birth to me, who'd held me when I was sick, who'd promised to always protect me. "He attacked me!" I gasped. "Derek attacked me. Mom, please call the police." She came down the stairs slowly, her silk dress rustling with each step. She looked at my face, at the blood, at the way I was cradling my side. Then she looked past me at Derek, who had appeared in the doorway, his hair slightly disheveled, his expression one of confused innocence. "Derek, what happened?" "I don't know, Catherine," he said, and his voice was so calm, so reasonable. "She just started screaming at me, said I was trying to steal Victoria from her. Then she threw herself against the counter. I think she's having some kind of breakdown." My mother's eyes traveled back to me, not with concern, not with the protective fury I'd seen her display when Victoria scraped her knee as a child. She looked at me with something far worse. Inconvenience. "Emma," she said, and her voice was cold as a glacier, "you need to get help. I'll call Dr. Phillips in the morning. Until then, I think it's best if you leave." I stood there, bleeding on her imported Italian tiles, and watched my mother choose my abuser over me. And in that moment, something died inside me, something that had been holding on, desperately hoping that somewhere deep down, she actually loved me. I left. I went to the emergency room alone. I told them I'd fallen down the stairs because I was too ashamed to admit what had really happened, too shocked, too broken. The doctors noted my injuries in their records: fractured cheekbone, 2 cracked ribs, contusion on my left temple. They gave me pamphlets about domestic violence resources, looking at me with knowing eyes, and I took them with shaking hands. When I got home to my small apartment, I collapsed on the floor and cried until I couldn't breathe. Not because of the pain in my body, because of the death of every hope I'd ever had that my family would someday see me for who I really was. That was when Ryan found me. He wasn't Ryan to me yet. He was just the quiet guy who lived in the apartment next door. I'd seen him coming and going, always polite, always keeping to himself. He drove an old Honda and wore clothes that looked like they came from the clearance rack at Target. Nothing special, nobody important. But that night when he heard me crying through the thin walls, he knocked on my door. When I didn't answer, he kept knocking. When I finally opened it, looking like death warmed over, he didn't say a word. He just helped me to my couch, got me ice for my face, and sat with me until the sun came up. He came back the next day, and the next, and slowly, piece by piece, he helped me put myself back together. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't learn for months, was that Ryan Mitchell wasn't just a quiet neighbor with a boring job and an unremarkable life. Ryan Mitchell was one of the most successful mergers and acquisitions attorneys in the country. He specialized in hostile takeovers and corporate restructuring. He had graduated top of his class from Harvard Law. He was worth more than my entire family combined. He didn't tell me any of this, not until I was ready, not until I was strong enough to understand what he was really offering me. Not rescue, not revenge, justice. Now, back to 3 days before Christmas, sitting in my drafty apartment with a text message that was supposed to destroy me glowing on my phone. "It begins," Ryan had said, and I knew exactly what he meant. For the past 8 months, while my family thought I was spiraling into obscurity, Ryan and I had been preparing, quietly, methodically, with the patience of spiders weaving an invisible web. It started with research. Ryan's firm had access to databases that could uncover financial secrets most people didn't even know existed. I'd told him about my parents' lavish lifestyle, about the new cars every year, the trips to Europe, the renovations to the family estate that never seemed to end. But I'd also told him that my father hadn't worked a real job in decades, that the family investments were supposedly managed by a small firm that my grandfather had trusted. That small firm no longer existed. Ryan discovered it had dissolved 12 years ago, but somehow the checks kept coming. Somehow the money kept flowing. The first thread he pulled revealed a shell company based in Delaware. The second revealed a network of LLCs that existed only on paper. The third revealed the truth that my parents had hidden for over a decade. They were broke. Not just broke. They were drowning in debt. The family fortune had evaporated years ago, eaten up by bad investments, gambling debts my father had hidden from everyone, and my mother's refusal to live within any kind of means. By the time my grandfather died, there was nothing left but the house and the family name, so they found a new source of income: Derek Whitmore. Derek's family didn't just have money, they had the kind of money that could make problems disappear. And when Derek developed his obsession with me, my parents saw an opportunity. If they could just get me to cooperate, to accept Derek's advances, to become part of his life in whatever way he wanted, the Whitmore fortune would bail them out. When I refused, when I fought back, when I ran bleeding from their house that night in March, they didn't just choose Derek over me. They chose survival. They chose the financial lifeline he represented. They chose to sacrifice their own daughter rather than face the consequences of their own failures. But they'd forgotten about Grandmother Elise. My grandmother was the one person in my family who had ever truly loved me. She'd been a firecracker of a woman, sharp-tongued and brilliant, who had never approved of the way her son had squandered the family fortune. Before she died 5 years ago, she'd called me to her bedside. "They'll try to destroy you someday," she'd whispered, her hand frail but her grip surprisingly strong. "Your father, your mother, they don't have the capacity to love anything that doesn't benefit them. But you, Emma, you're different. You're like me." She'd given me a key that day, a safety deposit box at a bank I'd never heard of, in a city I'd never visited. She told me to open it only when everything fell apart. 6 months ago, I finally opened it. Inside, I found 3 things. The first was a letter explaining that Grandmother Elise had quietly siphoned millions from the family fortune over the decades, building a secret trust that was completely invisible to my father's accountants. The second was the documentation for that trust, which named me as the sole beneficiary upon proof that my family had attempted to harm me for financial gain. The third was a list: names, dates, transactions, every piece of evidence I would ever need to prove what my parents had done. But we needed more. We needed them to admit it. We needed them to hang themselves with their own words. So we planned, and we waited. When my mother sent that text message 3 days before Christmas, excluding me from the family gala, she thought she was finally getting rid of the problem child. She thought I would slink away into obscurity, too broken to fight back. She had no idea that she'd just given me the opening I needed. I set down my phone and looked at Ryan. He was already reaching into his briefcase, pulling out the garment bag we'd prepared months ago. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since March." The dress inside was nothing like anything I'd ever worn before. Deep red, the color of old blood, tailored to fit me perfectly. The kind of dress that made you look like you owned the room, not like you were apologizing for being in it. Ryan went to the bedroom and came out in a suit that transformed him completely. Gone was the quiet neighbor in bargain clothes. In his place stood a man who radiated power, the kind of power that came from knowing exactly where the bodies were buried and having the shovels to dig them up. We didn't speak as we got ready. The silence wasn't heavy, it was focused, like soldiers checking their weapons before battle. The Harrington estate sat on 12 acres of manicured land, a monument to generations of wealth that no longer existed. As Ryan's car pulled up to the iron gates, I could see the lights blazing in every window. The driveway was packed with luxury vehicles, Bentleys and Mercedes, BMWs and Porsches, all lined up like an automotive museum of excess. The security guard at the gate didn't recognize me at first. When I rolled down my window, his eyes widened. "Miss Emma, we were told you weren't coming this year." I smiled. "Plans change." He hesitated for just a moment, then opened the gate. He'd worked for my family for 20 years. He wasn't paid enough to ask questions. We walked up the stone steps to the front door. I could hear the murmur of conversation from inside, the tinkling of crystal glasses, the soft strains of a string quartet playing Christmas carols. 200 of the city's elite gathered to celebrate the season and worship at the altar of old money. I didn't knock. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The entrance hall was exactly as I remembered it. Marble floors imported from Italy. A Christmas tree that soared 3 stories high, dripping with ornaments that cost more than most people's cars. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over silk dresses and tailored tuxedos, and then the conversation died. It was like someone had hit a mute button. 200 heads turned toward me, toward us, and the silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the ice settling in someone's champagne glass. My mother was the first to move. She crossed the entrance hall like a woman possessed, her heels clicking in angry rhythm against the marble. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, the kind of expression she'd perfected over decades of social maneuvering. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, grabbing my arm. Her nails dug into my skin through the fabric of my dress. "We told you to stay away. And who is this?" She shot a withering look at Ryan. "Another one of your charity cases?" Ryan smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a shark gives right before it takes a bite. Before I could respond, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, and Derek emerged. He looked perfect, of course. Tuxedo that probably cost more than my apartment's yearly rent. Glass of aged scotch in one hand. That same charming smile that had fooled my entire family. He walked right up to us, ignoring me completely, and stopped in front of Ryan. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, and tucked it into the breast pocket of Ryan's suit. "Nice of you to bring her," Derek said, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "But the help usually uses the service entrance. Why don't you go move your car around back? You're blocking the Porsches." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Polite laughter, cruel laughter. The kind of laughter that says, "We know our place, and you should know yours." My father appeared at Derek's shoulder, clapping him on the back with proprietary pride. "Good one, son. Can't expect these types to understand proper etiquette." Ryan didn't flinch. He looked down at the $5 bill, then up at Derek, and the smile never left his face. "I'll keep this," he said, his voice mild, "as a memento." My mother grabbed my arm tighter, steering us toward a corner table far from the center of the room. She was trying to minimize the damage, to stuff me away where I couldn't embarrass her in front of her precious guests. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "Derek is very upset with you. He's tried to forgive what you did, but you make it so difficult." "What I did?" "Your accusations, your breakdown. It was very embarrassing for everyone." I looked at her, this woman who had birthed me, raised me, and ultimately abandoned me. And I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just a cold, clear certainty about what came next. "I understand," I said, "but there's something you should know before we continue." My mother's eyes narrowed. "What?" I nodded toward Ryan, who had moved to stand near the main entrance to the ballroom. He pulled a leather briefcase from somewhere, the same briefcase that had held our documents, our evidence, our weapons. "The man you just insulted," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. "That's Ryan Mitchell, senior partner at Mitchell, Sterling & Associates. They specialize in hostile corporate restructuring and distressed asset acquisition." My mother's face went pale. She knew that firm. Everyone in this room knew that firm. They were the people you called when you wanted to take apart a company piece by piece. They were the people your enemies hired when they wanted to destroy you. And right now, I continued, he's acting as legal counsel for the sole lien holder of the property you're currently standing in. My mother's hand dropped from my arm like she'd been burned. "What are you talking about?" Across the room, my father was tapping a silver spoon against his champagne glass, calling for attention. He always did love to make speeches, to hold court, to pretend he was still the patriarch of a functioning dynasty. "Before we get to the evening's festivities," he announced, his voice booming with false confidence, "I want to make a toast. To family, to tradition, and to Derek, the son I always wished I'd had." He raised his glass, and 200 sycophants raised theirs in response. Derek smiled that perfect smile, basking in the admiration of people who had no idea what he really was. I stepped forward. "Actually, Dad," I said, projecting my voice across the suddenly silent room, "before you toast to Derek, maybe you should tell everyone how you plan to pay for all this." The glass slipped in my father's hand. He caught it, but not before splashing champagne down his sleeve. "Emma, this isn't the time or place for your dramatics." "I think it's exactly the time and place." I walked toward the center of the room, letting everyone see me, letting them wonder what the disgraced daughter was about to do. "After all, this is a celebration, isn't it? We should celebrate the truth." Derek moved to intercept me, his handsome face twisted with barely controlled rage. "You need to leave, now, before you embarrass yourself even more." Like I embarrassed myself that night in March, when you put me in the hospital? A gasp rippled through the crowd. My mother rushed forward, her hands fluttering. "She's lying," Catherine said, her voice shrill. "She's disturbed. She's been making up stories for months. Derek would never hurt anyone." "Wouldn't he?" Ryan's voice cut through the murmurs like a surgical knife. He'd opened his briefcase and was now holding a manila folder. "We have the hospital records from March 17th. Fractured cheekbone, 2 cracked ribs, contusion on the left temple." The attending physician noted that the injuries were inconsistent with a fall. He pulled out another document. "We also have security footage from a gas station 3 blocks from the Harrington estate, showing Derek's car speeding away from the property at 9:47 p.m. The same time Emma arrived at the emergency room." Derek's face went white. "That proves nothing." "Perhaps not on its own." Ryan's smile widened. "But combined with the 17 other incidents we've documented, the harassment, the stalking, the threats." He turned to address the crowd, as comfortable in this room of wealth and privilege as any of them. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ryan Mitchell. Some of you may have heard of my firm. We handle complex corporate matters, typically acquisitions and restructuring, but occasionally we take on special cases." He gestured toward me. "Emma Harrington's case is very special indeed. You see, for the past decade, the Harrington family has been running a rather elaborate confidence scheme. They've maintained the appearance of wealth while actually drowning in debt, credit default, shadow loans, shell companies designed to hide the true state of their finances from creditors, from the IRS, and from all of you." The room erupted, but Ryan raised his hand and somehow that simple gesture was enough to restore silence. 3 months ago, the primary creditor of the Harrington estate initiated foreclosure proceedings. The family was about to lose everything. The house, the reputation, their standing in this community. He paused. "And then something interesting happened. Emma came to me with certain documents that had been hidden in a safety deposit box by her grandmother, Elise Harrington." My mother's face contorted. "Those were supposed to be destroyed." "Were they?" Ryan pulled out another document. "Because according to this, Elise Harrington established a trust worth approximately $15 million. A trust that becomes accessible to Emma only upon proof that her immediate family conspired to harm her for financial gain." He let that sink in. I watched the realization spread across my parents' faces like a slow-moving fire. "The hospital records provide proof of harm," Ryan continued. "And these," he held up a thick stack of papers, "are emails, text messages, and recorded phone conversations in which Gerald and Catherine Harrington explicitly discuss their plan to use Emma as leverage in their financial dealings with the Whitmore family, to sacrifice her, as they put it, for the good of the family name." "You can't prove any of this," Derek snarled. "It's all fabricated." "Actually, we don't need to prove anything in court." Ryan's voice was almost gentle. "You see, Emma used a portion of her inheritance to purchase the outstanding debt on the Harrington estate. She bought the promissory notes. She bought the liens. She now owns every dollar this family owes to anyone." He turned to look at my father. "And because your parents signed a commercial loan agreement for their little tax shelter LLC, Gerald, they agreed to a confession of judgment clause. No trial, no hearing, no warning. The moment they defaulted, the lien holder could seize the assets." The room had gone completely silent. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. "Emma," Ryan said, "is the lien holder." I stepped forward, standing beside the man who had helped me rebuild my life, and looked at my parents for the last time. "You sold me," I said quietly. "You looked at your own daughter and saw a bargaining chip. When I refused to play along, you chose the man who beat me. You chose your lifestyle over my safety. You chose comfort over love." My mother tried to speak. No sound came out. "But you forgot about grandmother Elise. You forgot that she saw through all of you decades ago. She knew exactly what you were capable of, and she made sure I would have the tools to protect myself." I turned to the crowd, 200 people who had come to celebrate my family's false prosperity. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the Harrington family's final gala. Unfortunately, due to recent ownership changes, the estate will no longer be hosting social functions. The property will be inventoried and sold to pay outstanding debts. You have 30 minutes to collect your coats and say your goodbyes." Chaos erupted. Guests rushed for the exits. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing. My father was screaming at Ryan about lawyers and lawsuits, his face purple with rage. And Derek lunged at me, his hand raised in a fist, his face twisted with the same expression I'd seen that night in March. He never made contact. Ryan moved faster than I'd ever seen anyone move. He caught Derek's wrist, twisted, and brought him to his knees in a single fluid motion. "Assault in front of 200 witnesses," Ryan said calmly. "That should add nicely to the existing charges." Security arrived moments later, hired by the estate, now technically employed by me. They escorted Derek out in handcuffs. They escorted my parents out next, my mother still sobbing, my father still screaming threats that rang hollow in the cold December air. Victoria approached me as the room emptied. My sister, who had always been the golden child, who had never had to fight for anything, who had spent her entire life being given everything she wanted. "You can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "There are parents." They stopped being my parents the night they chose Derek over me. They stopped being my family when they decided I was worth less than their lifestyle. Victoria's face crumpled. "What about me? What am I supposed to do?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't expected. Not the pampered princess I'd resented for years. Just a scared woman who had never been taught how to stand on her own. "You have a choice," I said. "The same choice I had. You can keep pretending, keep enabling them, keep being the daughter they want you to be, or you can decide to become something else. Someone with their own life, their own values, their own definition of what family means." I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card, a therapist I'd worked with during my recovery. "If you ever want to talk," I said, pressing it into her hand. "Really talk. Call her." Victoria stared at the card, then at me, then at the empty room, the fallen champagne glasses, the Christmas tree that suddenly looked garish and sad. "I didn't know," she whispered, "about Derek, about any of it. I didn't know." "I know," I said, "but now you do." I left her standing there, holding that card like a lifeline, and walked out of my family home for the last time. The cold December air hit my face as I stepped onto the front steps. Ryan was waiting by the car, his breath forming small clouds in the darkness. "How do you feel?" he asked. I took a deep breath. The weight I'd been carrying for months, years, maybe my entire life, was finally lifting from my shoulders. "Free," I said. "I feel free." He opened the car door for me, and as I slid into the warmth of the passenger seat, I looked back at the house one last time. The lights were still on, but the windows were empty now. No more parties, no more galas, no more pretending. In the morning I would meet with lawyers to begin the formal process of liquidating the estate. The proceeds would pay off the remaining debts, with whatever was left going to charity, to the domestic violence shelter where I'd once volunteered, to the counseling center that had helped me rebuild my sense of self, to organizations that helped people like me, people who'd been betrayed by the families that were supposed to protect them. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, I drove back to my small apartment with Ryan by my side. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. Some silences are worth more than words. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of a modest house we'd just purchased. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed wealth or status, just good bones and room to grow. Ryan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "The movers just called," he said. "They'll be here in an hour." I leaned back into him, looking out the window at the snow falling softly in the backyard. "My mother called again yesterday." "What did she want?" "Forgiveness, I think. She's been staying with Victoria since the estate sale. They lost most of the furniture, the cars, everything that wasn't nailed down. They're talking about downsizing to an apartment. How do you feel about that?" I thought about it, really thought about it. A year ago, I might have felt satisfaction, vindication, maybe even joy at their suffering. Now, I just felt nothing. Not cold nothing, not angry nothing, just the peaceful nothing of someone who has finally let go. "I hope they figure it out," I said finally. "I hope they learn how to be real people instead of performers. But that's not my journey to take. I gave them every chance, and they made their choices." Ryan kissed my temple. "What about Derek?" The trial had ended 2 weeks ago. Assault, attempted battery, stalking, 18 months in minimum security, plus 5 years of probation. The Whitmore family had tried to make it go away, but Ryan's evidence was too solid, the witnesses too numerous, the medical records too damning. Last I heard, his father disowned him, wrote him out of the will completely. Apparently, the Whitmores value their reputation more than they value their son. Poetic. Ironic. He spent so long trying to control others that he never learned how to control himself. And now he's got nothing but time to think about it. The doorbell rang. Ryan went to answer it, and I heard Victoria's voice in the hallway. She'd been coming around more often lately. At first I'd been suspicious. Old wounds don't heal easily, and I wasn't sure I could trust her motives. But slowly, painfully, she'd started to change. She'd taken a job, for the first time in her life, started seeing the therapist I'd recommended, begun to question all the things she'd been taught to believe. She wasn't perfect, neither was I, but she was trying. Victoria came into the kitchen, holding a bottle of wine and looking uncertain. "I wasn't sure if you'd want company," she said. "With the move and everything? You can stay if you help unpack boxes." She smiled, a tentative smile that was still learning how to be genuine. "I can do that." Ryan and I exchanged a look. This was what recovery looked like, I realized. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a satisfying revenge fantasy where the villains got exactly what they deserved and the hero walked off into the sunset without a backward glance. It was messier than that, more complicated. There were still days when the anger surprised me, rising up from nowhere like a tide. There were still nights when the nightmares came, when I woke up gasping, reaching for the bruises that had long since healed on the outside, but still ached somewhere deeper. But I was building something new, a life defined not by what had been done to me, but by what I chose to do next. A family not of blood, but of choice. Ryan, who had seen me at my worst and never once looked away. Victoria, who was learning that sisterhood could mean something more than competition. The friends I'd made at the support groups, the colleagues who knew my story and respected my strength. Grandmother Elise had given me more than money. She'd given me the means to become myself, to stop apologizing for existing, to stop trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Her letter had ended with a single sentence that I still carried with me, folded in my wallet like a talisman. "The people who truly love you will never make you earn it. The people who make you earn it will never truly love you. Choose wisely, my darling girl." I had chosen. And for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. The movers arrived as the sun broke through the clouds. Victoria helped us unpack dishes while Ryan assembled furniture and swore creatively at IKEA instructions. By evening, the house was starting to feel like a home. As I hung the last picture on the wall, my phone buzzed with a text. An unknown number. I almost didn't read it, but something made me open it anyway. It was from my father. Just one line. "I'm sorry. I hope someday you can understand." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I did something I'd never been able to do before. I deleted it. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because some chapters, once closed, should stay closed. Because understanding doesn't mean accepting. Because forgiveness, when it comes, has to be on my terms, in my time, or not at all. I put my phone away and walked to the window where Ryan was standing, looking out at the first stars appearing in the winter sky. "Everything okay?" he asked. I thought about the question. About all the years I'd spent trying to be okay for other people, performing wellness for an audience that was never satisfied. "Not okay?" I said finally. "Better than okay. Real." He smiled and pulled me close. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white. A fresh start, a blank page. And for the first time in my life, I got to write my own story. Not the story my parents wanted for me, not the story Derek tried to force on me, not the story of a victim, defined forever by what had been done to her. My story, messy and complicated and imperfect. Mine. If you've ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever had to choose yourself when everyone else chose against you, if you've ever had to burn a bridge to save your own life, then you understand. Some fires are necessary, some endings are beginnings, and some 3 days before Christmas text messages are the best gifts you'll ever receive, not because they don't hurt, they do, but because they finally set you free.